Good morning, everybody. A really lovely, engaging session to open today. And I suppose I'd just like to say that I love radio as well. It was nice to hear the guys say that they love radio. But I suppose I differ from the guys in that I'd like to see that love converted into more euros coming our way to the radio industry, as we're definitely going to demonstrate that, you know, we deserve to have a bigger share of the advertising pie. So I'm here as chair of Choose Radio to just give you a little insight into what Choose Radio is all about. And the main event is obviously to hand over to Damian Loscher from IPSOS MRBI, as we have commissioned some research that we're going to share with you today in conjunction with the Jane Law Management Committee. So, Choose Radio. Clearly we need to shout about more what we're actually doing from the opening session this morning. We are a collaboration between the state broadcaster RTE and the sales houses, which represent the 34 independent commercial radio stations. We're a small group, voluntary group, that is working together in the last year more intensely to try and come up with various initiatives to raise the awareness and to highlight the power of radio that we certainly believe needs to be done. One of the key highlights of the last year has been that we have streamlined how the business of Jane Law data is communicated to not just our own stations, but also to the journalists, to the agency personnel, because previously all of you used to receive umpteen messages from each individual radio station, which, to be honest, was just a mess of white noise and nobody was really benefiting. So now on Jane Law Day, we have one industry-agreed deck that is shared to everyone by Choose Radio and is working really, really effectively in the last year. And along with that, as Peter McPartlin referred to, we have commissioned Orange Eye Digital Media, who produce a highlights video on the Jane Law data, which is a nice way of showing our excellent figures. I'm sure many of you have seen the video already, and if you haven't, it's excellent, so definitely worth another watch.
If the referendum is approved by the Irish people, a doctor-led, safe and legal system for the termination of pregnancies will be introduced.
Thunder. Thunder. Feel the thunder. Lightning and the thunder. Thunder.
To allow the people to make this decision.
I might get your song played on the radio station.
Hey Alexa, can you ask Irish Radio Player to play
We've also recently appointed Choose Radio champions at each individual radio station, because, you know, we can't expect everyone else to shout about it if we're not going to shout about it ourselves. So right down to grassroots level, we encourage each Choose Radio champion to ensure that everyone in their radio station knows what Choose Radio is doing and encourages everyone at the radio station to shout about the various initiatives that we're doing. So this worked really well on Jane Law Day, where we obviously shout about it on our own radio stations, but we chose Twitter as a platform to highlight what our results were on Jane Law Day, and it worked really well for us. We were obviously trending for most of the day, and the next day of Jane Law as #1 in Ireland and across Europe. And we shared the video with over a database of over 500 people, and it was viewed 354 times, and that many page views. So we do think we're heading in the right direction in terms of communicating better about what we do really well. We are also very proud of the fact that recently we helped Radio Player highlight the fact that its skills are now available on Amazon Alexa. You know, this is a really important step for the industry. As I'm sure you're well aware, the Alexa app was the most downloaded app on Christmas Day. So it's, if this is where our listeners are choosing to access audio, then it's really important that we are there and available, to showcase all of our range of stations on devices such as Alexa. And, hopefully we'll do similar with Google Home and Apple HomePod. It's great that we're on the device such as Alexa, but we still have to tweak it further to make sure that it's really easy for our listeners to find us on these platforms. We've also hosted some great radio events in the last year, and this one in particular worked really well. It was a packed house, and what was distinctive was that we had 4 different clients talking individually about how they had used radio in 4 different ways. So we had Catherine, she has a small business called Boutique Bake. She talked about spot advertising, how it had worked for her. Then Dave Mindshare talked about a digital collaboration that they had done with Fáilte Ireland and with the Wild Atlantic Way. Harvey Norman, big multinational, big fan of radio. And then we had Universal talking about a really innovative collaboration that they had done with Media Central to promote the movie Sing FM. So 4 very distinct things that radio offers, and these 4 clients were able to highlight how they had gotten excellent results in 4 very different ways. So we look forward to bringing more of these case studies to your attention in the coming months. We're also very aware of the fact that, we're always talking about the data and what we need to do with the data. So we sent out a survey not so long ago asking for feedback on MediaStar, which is the software used to analyse the Jane Law data. And we got some really constructive feedback from agency personnel on that. So we will be obviously working through and coming up with the action points and how we can address some of the issues that you mentioned this morning in your session, because we are aware that there are challenges with the data, but it is robust data that we want to make sure that you can find out about as easy as possible. So one of the things we've done is we are working with our independent learning network, Learning Waves, to create a training program which is geared specifically at agency personnel to better equip them with the tools so that they can analyse the data in a more tangible and easily accessible way. I think that's, from the session this morning, that's clearly something that we need to be doing as a priority. Research is key for Choose Radio, and this year we're definitely putting a focus on that. This was research that we carried out back in 2015, where we commissioned actually IPSOS MRBI to carry out research on the total audio landscape, and these were the conclusions. It was a sample size of 1,100 people, and the conclusions were that despite growing opportunities to access audio, there's still almost universal listening to radio. Radio emerges with the greatest proportion of time spent listening when compared with Spotify, podcasts, own music, and YouTube. Radio continues to be relevant. Its particular strength is delivering topical news, information, and music. This suggests a landscape where both radio and other audio content can exist. Wow. Fulfilling complementary needs and occasions. And I think if we were to do a similar study today, you'd find similar results. Fast forward to February 2018, and these are the stats from our Jane Law, which also analyses the audio market. And you can see that, once again, radio has the biggest share of all our audio listening at over 85%. Close second is own music at 8%, Spotify is at 3.3%, and then podcast is at the bottom of it. So there's so much talk about radio as a traditional medium that's on the decline, and we obviously working in the industry would beg to differ and are very confident that we have the facts to show that that is not the case. I would like to give my tuppence worth on it. On Christmas Day, my husband introduced a new female into our household. This was her. I'm sure you all know her name. That's Alexa. And I have to say, my husband, my 7-year-old daughter, my 3-year-old son, and myself, we all enjoy being entertained by Alexa, as this little snippet of a video of life in the Cummins Holden household will show you.
Alexa, will you marry me?
Thank you, but I made a promise to myself that I won't get married until Mars is colonized.
Until what is colonized? Alexa, do you want to be my friend?
Sure, I'm always happy to make new friends.
Alexa, what do you think of my wife?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Sitting on the fence there, Alexa. wise decision. So like she is really entertaining and she has a mind of information, but you know what? She's AI, so she's very clinical, she's very robotic. And, I don't know about you, but in my friendships and any relationships that I have, I like it to be a two-way natural process. She knows a lot about me. I don't really know a lot about her. Anytime I ask her a question, she's very evasive and she doesn't really tell me a lot about herself because, you know what, she's a robot. So she's clinical and robotic. She doesn't have a lot to reveal about herself. Contrast that with radio, and all over the country, we have 3.1 million listeners choosing our radio stations. And why is that? Because they get to engage with all of our presenters day in, day out. And more importantly, our presenters give something back to them. It's a two-way, natural human connection. And that's really important. And I don't think we shout about it. You mentioned about engagement this morning. Like, we are absolutely so amazing at engaging with our audience. And we obviously need to capitalize that more. I run regional radio station Beat 102, 103, and we have a breakfast show called Beat Breakfast with Niall, Vinny and Trish. And I'm glad to say we have thousands of super loyal fans, and Niall, Vinny and Trish know a lot about those super loyal fans, but more importantly, those thousands of loyal fans know a lot about Niall, Vinny and Trish. They know that Niall is the one who has a cat called Jessica, named after Jessica Fletcher, we won't ask. They know that Vinny is the very, very cranky one.
It was just, why are we paying our television license for this rubbish? Rubbish it was, rubbish. I'm embarrassed for them all.
That was him on a good day. And then we have Trish as well, who's the feminist from Jamaica. So day in, day out, they have meaningful engagements with their audience. I was listening to them on the way into the car on Monday or Tuesday, and they were having a really entertaining conversation about the goodie bags in IPSOS versus the BAFTAs. And it was just fantastic audio. And I was looking through our Facebook last night, and the comments that people engaged with the three guys about it was just gold. There was some people were saying, I'm listening on the bus, people are looking at me, I'm laughing so much. Someone else was saying, I'm driving in my car and you've just made my day. So these are just examples of how our breakfast shows, the length and breadth of the country, are engaging with so many people on a human level, on a day-to-day basis. It really is replicated right across the country. So, this is a radio conference, first and foremost, so I would appreciate if you can just indulge me for a few minutes and just sit back and listen to what I think is some great radio from stations representing each of the sales houses all around the country.
Karina's in a tie, how are you? Wow, Karina, we've obviously tickled you.
We allow our children to go on the social media sites. We have absolutely no idea in the world what they can get up to, what they can share, or who can come into our homes.
Via these devices and via these social media sites.
Absolutely. I wouldn't even trust parental controls. I think as parents we have to say, it's no harm now and again to say no. We are the parents.
James, congratulations. Well played. You got yourselves tickets for the academic and the Big Bear quiz. Woohoo!
Great.
So, I'm sorry, James.
What? That didn't sound very enthusiastic, but I am very enthusiastic.
Okay, well, could you sound it, please?
Great.
I'll give it to you again. Hey, James, congratulations. You got tickets for the academic and the Big Bear quiz.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Sarcastic.
That's the enthusiasm we were looking for.
Okay, and what happened?
There was a girl who jumped in, one of their friends, and she tried to stop him, but there was other girls that was with the fella that was fighting that jumped in as well.
So at one stage, how many had jumped in and were fighting?
About 6 or 7.
Were they trying to rob these two young fellas?
No. He was drunk. Your man was drunk as a skunk.
This guy is actually homeless. He hasn't a thing to his name.
Wow.
So I was so touched. As a thank you, I got him a gift card and I left it into the cafe. So it turns out he had given it to a lady who was in there with her kids and she was paying for a coffee. And I said it to him a few days later. I was like, why didn't you keep it? And he said, look, just pass on the random act of kindness. That's all I ask you to do. Which I thought was just so amazing. So lovely.
And you know what? I've heard that in the past as well. When you try and thank someone for them doing a nice thing, they're like, no, pass it on to somebody else. That's all I want, you know?
I'm actually bullying and I'm crying now. Oh my God.
Oh, you're just the tonic the country needed today. Do you believe that you, Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan, will be vindicated by the O'Neill inquiry and indeed by the GSOC one?
Obviously, I and Garda Síochána, as always, will cooperate fully with the inquiry, and it will reach its findings. And as I say, I'm satisfied that the process will establish the truth.
You're after making my day. The Waves show got closed down on Saturday, so this is going to brighten our day up.
Oh, wow.
This kind of, something like this pops up and it makes you realise someone's looking out for you sometimes.
They love the show. We listen to it all the time.
Oh, that's great, man.
And I tell you what, we won't turn it off now. Lads, you're gents.
Thanks for listening.
Okay. See ya. Bye. Bye. Can't cope. It's AFM. We've got some other stuff on the show later. Who cares? So comfortable living in a bubble.
It's Radio in Ireland. I think that's pretty excellent, I have to say. If, some or all of that audio didn't evoke some kind of emotion in each of you in this room, then you're just dead inside. As a fellow radio practitioner, Lucy Barrett from the Radio Centre UK, obviously we Choose Radio, we're trying our best to emulate some of the great work that Radio Centre UK has done. And she said, radio isn't just resilient, it's irrepressible, and I obviously agree with her. And to quote the lyrics from the track, the Katy Perry track that I sampled on the audio montage there, so comfortable we're living in a bubble. Is that the case for all of us in this room, for the wider media sector, when compared with the 3.1 million listeners that we have? We at Choose Radio, we believe we have concrete J and Laura data that is very robust, which clearly shows that the love affair with radio in Ireland is still very much alive. And, we want to just, get that message out as much as we can. And I suppose we just want to compare that with the listening habits of the media sector in Ireland now, and that's the research that we're going to hear about shortly. If I can just ask you to give a warm welcome to Mr. Damian Loscher from IPSOS MRBI.
Morning, everyone. This works, doesn't it? Yeah, fantastic. I'd like to be able to see my slides. Okay, brilliant. Good morning, great to be here. And as Gabrielle said, the focus of my and I'm going to actually kind of condense it a little bit because I want to keep people, make sure you get out to your mid-morning break. The focus is on a small but very interesting piece of research that we did. Essentially what we did was we took the J and Laura questionnaire, the core part of the questionnaire, so the first couple of key sections, and we asked the media industry to complete for themselves. So how much radio and other media do media buyers consume? And we can compare and contrast that with what everybody else in the population is telling us. So that's the real focus of today's presentation, and it's absolutely fascinating, the findings. But just before I do that, just to, I suppose, kind of go down memory lane for a second a little bit, because, there is a lot of talk about J and Laura. There's been talk even kind of in the earlier session today about the accuracy and the fit for purpose of J and Laura. And, J and Laura is international best practice. It's well known, well proven, and well audited. But it would be unfair to say that it hasn't evolved and changed over quite many years. You'll see that we started our J and Laura research actually started in 1989. The first report was produced in 1990. And all we had at that time was a few thousand respondents. And as the years have kind of gone by, it's changed, it's grown. We've increased the sample size, which is probably kind of one of the most significant, particularly from a budgeting point of view, that we've actually done. We've added stations, and again, as the radio landscape has evolved, as more stations have come on board, the J and Laura has adapted to that, and more stations added in there. We launched the J and Laura portal in 2005, so again, bringing technology in terms of how we present the data quite a long time ago. Moving to quarterly reporting in 2006. Metering. I'm going to talk a little more about that in a second, but that's something that's been on our agenda for the last decade. We've been looking very closely and very intensely, and the first time we really started to look at that was in 2008 with a visit to TNS Denmark, who were using the technology at that stage. Increased sample size in Dublin in 2013. 2014, people say, actually, well, is J and Laura adapting to the changes in how we're actually consuming radio? 2014, we made sure we started including how people listen by platform, not just in terms of FM, AM radio. 2015, Gabrielle's already presented some of the findings, and what we now do on a regular basis is we collect information on total listening. And again, I think a lot of people aren't even aware of that, aren't even aware of the fact that there is data out there, not just on how many minutes people actually spend listening to radio, but how many minutes people spend listening to Spotify and their own music and streaming. 2015 further review of personal meeting technology. So it's kind of it's been evolving in its own way, and just kind of one interesting number over the last almost 30 years, 378,000 interviews, as a kind of a very simple demonstration of the robustness of JLR. But it has been evolving, but you know, I get the sense that sometimes, and I'll kind of just digress for a little second, because I know it came up in the earlier session about the accuracy of JLR, and it seems to come up quite a bit. So I'll spend a minute or two just to kind of addressing some of the cores of JLR. It is evolving, but I get the sense sometimes that it's not evolving in the way that the media industry would like it to evolve. But I'm also kind of quite aware of the fact that I don't think necessarily the industry is fully aware of the evolution of JLR and how it's actually conducted and why it's conducted in the way it's conducted. JLR is, it's a people-on-people measure. Okay, so we essentially have people, your general public, and we have people ask them questions. Okay, that's the fundamentals of survey research. Okay, so the evolution of JLR essentially has been kind of one key front, the people we ask. That hasn't changed, you know, and it can't change because the fundamentals of good research is asking a representative sample of people, okay? And everything that the committee and the industry has done is maintained and kept to that particular simple law. What has changed are the questions we ask people, okay? So as people have listened to more radio stations, as people listen to radio stations in a different way, we ask them how they're listening, when they're listening, what platform they're listening. Okay, so that's evolved and it continues to evolve as people will change how they listen. We'll change that. The other aspect or element of the JLR is people asking people. Okay, so it's our interviewers, and at the moment, our interviewers, it's a two-step process in terms of recording the data. Okay, so the interviewer records the data on pen and paper, and then that's data entered at a later stage. Okay, now. Sometimes I think what seems to be is, you know, because we're now using technology in so many different ways and in how we consume radio as well, there's a kind of a feeling that actually, well, you know what, if we're not using all sorts of new technology to measure how people consume radio, is it really able to keep up to date with changes in how people are consuming radio? And the obvious, not really obvious, one change would be, for example, why don't we use CAPI, computer-aided personal interviewing? Why don't we actually have it a one-stage process in terms of collecting the data? Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense because as an agency, most of what we do is one-stage data collection. So in our telephone interviewing, it's one-stage data collection. The interviewer will input it into the system. In CAWI, our web interviewing, the interview, obviously the respondent will put it straight into the system. And also for most of our face-to-face or in-home research, in other words, where we knock on people's doors, that's exactly what happens as well. All our interviewers are CAPI enabled. So in other words, they can all conduct computer-aided personal interviewing. So the question then is, why don't we use that for the JLR? And the question is very simple. The most important thing is the interviewer experience and the respondent experience. In other words, that dynamic between interviewer and respondent. And we have piloted over the years many different ways of introducing a computer, or a laptop or a tablet in between the respondent and the interviewer. And what we find is we do not get the same quality data. We do not get the same quality experience. Now, from a research point of view, and from a research agency point of view, it would be a lot more convenient for us to move to a CAPI system for JLR. But the JLR committee, and on this I have to applaud them, won't move until they're absolutely satisfied that the quality is in no way compromised. Okay? So it's not about not using technology, it's about maintaining the quality of the data that we collect. Now, there is another aspect or component to this, which is metering, and it comes up quite a bit. So why aren't we, instead of moving from, instead of having it man on man or woman on woman, as it more often tends to be, why can't we have it machine on machine? So why can't we use meters to, excuse me for a second, it's a little bit thirsty. Why can't we use machines? As you can see, we've been looking at this, and this is very much not a JLR committee perspective, this is a research perspective, a pure research perspective. We've been looking at this for the last decade. And there are parts of the world where we have machine on machine for radio. We have metering. Again, most parts of the world you don't, just to kind of make that point. And For the rest of the world that don't have it, there's two real reasons why they don't have it. Okay? The first one is the standards they set for the quality of the data they get through that technology. Okay? Certainly in the early days, people would have said, yes, you can measure people's listening through metering. In other words, you have a device that picks up an encoded signal or matches like they do with TV. But in the early days, not really great quality. Yeah. Less and less now, that's a reason not to go to metering, because if we take our colleagues in the UK, in Rajar, they've spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of euros, money that we could not spend, trialling meters. And they've kind of reached the stage now where they kind of go, actually, you know what? It's almost there where we're kind of happy that metering has the capability to deliver accurate data. And there's a live pilot ongoing in the UK at the moment. So in other words, Rajar in the UK have kind of brought it to a stage where they're kind of saying, actually, you know what? We think this technology is good enough for us. Yeah. Now, the second question then is the cost. Yeah. The interesting thing about the cost is most people, I imagine, would think that the main cost driver of metering is the technology. Okay? And that's important because if we think technology is the main driver, we imagine that over time it's going to get much cheaper and cheaper to do it. So in other words, okay, 10 years ago it was too expensive to introduce this technology. Surely now this technology has come down in price to the point where it is affordable. But the reality is the main, it's only a minor part of the cost is the technology. The main driver of the cost is moving from survey research to panel research. So you move from paying for someone to be interviewed for 15 minutes on their doorstep to paying them to carry around a meter or a device of some sort for a year, recruited, monitored, trained, managed, quality controlled. That's the key driver of cost. And I think that massive challenge to the industry has not gone away and is not going away. So metering is something that we are constantly looking at to see if it can deliver better data. At this moment in time, we're getting to the stage where you could say it can deliver equivalent data through the technology, but then the question is it worth, is that equivalence of data, and maybe that speed of data, worth a multiple of the fee in terms of what it costs? So that's exactly where it is. But the one last kind of point I'd say on it, the interesting thing is when people talk about the accuracy of JNLR data, and it does come up from time to time, I've never had anybody bring it up in the context of what was inaccurate about it. Yeah? It's always accuracy, but not actually what's inaccurate about it. Because I think, and I know, and I think everybody kind of close to the industry and everybody who understands research knows it is accurate data. I think some of the challenges it faces is that the findings don't seem believable. Are you telling me so many people, all those millions and millions, listen to radio? Surely not. And earlier on, we kind of, there used to be this thing where you had kind of the chairman's wife syndrome, where, if you didn't like the ad because the chairman's wife said it was a rubbish ad, it didn't actually go. We are kind of getting to a bit of a chairman's children type scenario, where we often hear this, oh, well, my kids don't listen to radio, or this generation don't listen to radio, they don't listen to radio at all. So what I'm going to do for the next few slides is just take you through some of the research that we've conducted into that in particular. Just a quick reminder of the resilience of radio. Again, this sense of, well, nobody listens to radio anymore. I'm afraid they do. And the wonderful thing about JNLR is it is perfectly consistent in its methodology and approach and its robustness for the last almost 30 years. So we know that, yes, there aren't as many people who said they listened to the radio yesterday, but those people who said they listened to the radio yesterday said they listened to it for longer than they did 30 years ago. The net result is, for the average person in Ireland, compared to almost 30 years ago, they are listening to more radio, okay, on an average day. Now, when you actually add in the fact that we've got, well over 1 million more people in Ireland in the last 30 years, that's an awful lot of radio listening. Yes, it is true that younger people aren't listening to as much radio, but you still have 2 or 3 in every 4 of your 15 to 34s listening to radio every day. Why is it resilient? Very quickly, it's resilient because we're all social animals. Yeah. If you go back thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, our needs haven't changed, particularly our social needs. And the ones I've called out here is to be entertained, to communicate, to feel part of a community, to be involved. These are fundamental needs that we have as human beings, and they're not going to change. And the reason why radio is so resilient is because it taps into those so well, and Gabrielle kind of tried to bring it out in her presentation, how exciting and engaging and interesting and fascinating radio can be. And that's why it's so enduring. And it's so enduring that, it's not just a human attribute. Animals share all of these same needs to feel part of the community, to have friends, to have family, to communicate, to be informed. So the true test of whether or not our fundamental needs, or these fundamental needs remain fundamental, of course, is to look at the most evolved of our species, the media buyer. Well, certainly in terms of a media sense, the most evolved of our species. So what we did was, we said, okay, the industry, and with thanks for everybody in the industry for doing this, put together the email addresses, or gathered the email addresses for 400 media buyers in Ireland. I'm sure some people were missed off, but generally speaking, it was a very, very comprehensive database. And we asked them all online, which is a different methodology, but it was the exact same questions, quarter hour by quarter hour, radio listening yesterday, 2 what stations, and also the grid that asks about the different types of media, whether it's listening, watching, reading, and so on, how many, just to estimate yesterday how many minutes they spent doing each of those things. 120 completed, which is fantastic, and I'm sure some of you in the room completed it. Thank you very much for that, really appreciate it. What we've done here is, when you sometimes, if you think about the media buyer only accounts for, and this is why I'm saying the most evolved of our species, in a media sense anyway, 0.01% of the population is a media buyer. So 1 in every 10,000 people. So this is the group that will be, you would imagine, the most leading edge, the most engaged with new media, new ways of doing things, the least likely to have any interest in radio, because radio is terribly old-fashioned. Nobody listens to radio anymore. Certainly not in the media world. So the media buyer is the little red bit over on the right-hand side. What we do is we compare the findings for all adults in the JNLR, which is kind of all of your grey people, which is all adults. So we can compare all 3-point-whatever million adults with our exotic media buyer. And we've also got this other group called the avatar, right? And the reason why I did that was because, actually, you know what? Okay, we have the media buyer here and we have all adults here. If there's a difference, is the difference because they are media buyers, they're involved in the media industry, they're very exposed to media trends, or is the difference in how they behave to the general public simply because they tend to be younger, they tend to be educated, they live in Dublin? So what we've done is we've taken a subsample of the JNLR data of 20 to 54-year-olds, Dublin commuter area, full-time employed, university degree, as kind of going, actually, well, so that's kind of the more, and that's kind of another subsample of it. So let's compare the 3 of them. So we have the all adults, we have this kind of younger, working, similar generation, and then we have our, like I said, our very interesting media buyer. Here's the first picture. So this isn't the quarter-hour data. This is a kind of a question we asked very generally, which is, yesterday, how many minutes roughly did you spend doing each of the following? Okay, so, and we asked the respondents to go through, for example, reading a national newspaper, reading a local newspaper, watching a video channel or video content on demand, watching TV, live or recorded, listening to radio, your own music, audio streaming, and so on, right? So we've grouped them into listening, reading, watching, friending, which is, again, you can guess what that is, Facebooking, and so on, social media, and searching. Again, to me, the one fascinating thing is, and how fundamental is it? Well, listening is listening is listening. And whether you're an odd adult, whether you're kind of a young, urban, educated person, or whether you're a media buyer, you pretty much spend the same amount of time or portion of your time listening. We found a very similar time proportion reading. Watching, a little bit less so. Again, but a lot of that watching is accounted for the fact that, not necessarily because you're a media buyer, it's because you're a bit younger and you're a bit more urban and you're educated and so on. As you can see, the middle one there is closer to 29 to 26. Where you see a little bit of a difference is the media buyer is spending a little more time friending, and maybe it's more sociable animal, and not much different to the general population in terms of searching. Okay, so a little bit more friending, but other than that, a little bit less watching, but not massively different in other ways to the general population. Okay. So our fundamentals seem to be holding up. Now it gets interesting because we kind of go, okay, so we're all satisfying our fundamental needs the same way. But we're actually satisfying them in a slightly different way. So we all have the same needs, satisfied in a slightly different way. So what we've pulled out here, for example, is the top one is listening. Okay, so it's the proportion of time spent on the one hand listening to radio, yeah, as opposed to listening to own music, as opposed to audio streaming, as opposed to listening back. Yeah. So on the left-hand side, you'll see, and I think Gabrielle covered this data off earlier, we're listening to an awful lot of radio. So the vast, vast majority of our listening is to radio. And a question gets asked an awful lot is, well, and this data has been available and continues to be available, where we listen and how we listen. The question usually is, well, that couldn't be right. You know what I mean? Like what do you mean? What do you mean only 1% of the population are listening to podcasts, or 2%? Or that doesn't make any sense to me. And the reason why it doesn't make any sense is because the very right-hand side is because the media buyer is very different to the average person. For the media buyer, they are spending as much time audio streaming and listening back as they are to listening to radio or even to their own music. So we have this, I think what researchers might call some sort of availability heuristic, which is we tend to imagine the rest of the world is a bit more like us. Yeah. And this is a fabulous way of highlighting the fact that, well, the rest of the world in some ways is exactly like you in terms of their need to listen, their need to read, their need to be informed, their need to be entertained. But they're not at all like you in terms of how they might be consuming. Yeah, you are listening in a very different way, and particularly when it comes to radio. And watching is something similar, where we have a media buyers who are evenly split between watching video on demand, or Spotify's and or their Netflixes and so on, as opposed to watching TV live or recorded. It's not the same for the general population by any stretch of the imagination. So at least it helps me. It doesn't necessarily answer it, but it helps me understand why we often get these questions. But surely, no. That's your life. It's not everybody else's life. The last couple of slides, this one very interesting, a window on the life of your media buyer. So this is radio consumption by quarter hour throughout the day. Yeah. So this is the core kind of J&L grid as per media buyer. Yeah. So the media buyer is at the bottom. The first interesting thing is you can see they have a very different day. Peaks at commuter hours. Yeah, very obviously peaks. The second thing that's fascinating is there's the highest quarter hour amongst anybody is amongst media buyers. 40% of media buyers are listening to the radio between 8 and 8:15 in the morning. For the average person, the highest they get to is 36%. For that avatar group, it's 34%. So the interesting is, we might have had this question in our head kind of going, actually, maybe they're not listening to radio at all. Maybe that's why we feel, and I think there is a kind of maybe a general sense in this room that you're not getting bang for buck and you need to be spending more money on radio. Yeah. Maybe the reason for that is because, media buyers don't listen to radio. Well, no, they do. They listen to, as you can see, quite a bit of radio. The one that fascinates me probably the most is actually they're still listening to the radio at 11 o'clock in the morning and 12 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd love that job, to be able to listen to radio all throughout the day. And this is radio buyers who completed the J&L interview saying what they did the previous day, the previous weekday, listening to the radio. Yeah. So that's a window on their particular day. These are some of the key stats now that we can compare with the total population and with our avatar group and with the radio buyer. So some of the key metrics. Daily reach, 83. This is the total population, so numbers you're all familiar with. Yeah. 83% for daily reach. Average minutes, 228. Again, familiar but still quite staggering, in terms of the time we spend with radio. The top quarter hour is, as you saw on the previous slide, 10 to 10:15, which is 36%. Average quarter hour is 26%. Weekly reach is 93%. So when we focus on that younger group, educated group, the one who are working full time and living kind of in Dublin, the Dublin area, we see a little bit of a drop off, in terms of reach at 78%, in terms of minutes at 176. Still massive numbers for this particularly more modern, younger, more innovative audience. Top quarter hour is 8 to 8:15 again. Commuting 34%. Average quarter hour is down to 18%, a little bit, and weekly reach is at 91%, still quite massive. Now, so our media buyer, the most evolved of our species, the most likely to be dumping radio for new technologies, new ways of being entertained, being informed. 88% reach. So your average media buyer is more likely to listen to the radio than the average person. Yeah. 143 minutes, yes, they listen to a little bit less. I hope they do, because they're supposed to be working very hard. Yeah. Not working hard enough selling radio, but they're supposed to be working very hard. But still 143 minutes. Still 2.5 hours of radio every day amongst media buyers. Top quarter hour, as we saw, was 40%, 8 to 8:15, 17% on AQH, and weekly reach, and 94%. Yeah. Large numbers. Now, again, that's what they're listening to. Yeah. In some respects, what you want them to do is listen. You don't really mind if someone listens to it on their phone, or if they listen to it in their car, or whatever else. You want them to listen. Yeah. This is how people generally listen now. 95% AM, FM radio, 1% on a laptop, 2% on a mobile device, 1% on TV set, or that star is less than 0.5%. Digital radio, 1%. Again, sometimes these numbers seem a little bit, not everybody's listening still on the radio, are they? They are. And when you look at that kind of younger avatar group, you little less AM, FM radio, a little bit more mobile device. Yeah, so it makes sense. They're younger. They're more likely to have smartphones. And then we look finally at the media buyer. And again, you can see here where their perception of how people consume radio is probably different to how people actually consume radio, because they consume it differently. They still 68% on a radio, or on an AM, FM radio, probably in their car, probably commuting. 12% on a PC laptop, which is massively different to the average person. On a mobile device, 2% for the average person, 15% for the media buyer. So again, very different in terms of how they consume radio, not so different in the fact that they consume radio, which is the important thing. And just a last slide. What we did for the last analysis was we took Core Media's 2018 projections for spend across radio, TV, print, and digital. And then we took those particular headings on our average minutes data, and we just said, okay, how does it look for the different audiences? Yeah. So on the left-hand side was the 2008 projections from Core Media, and thanks to Alan for sending me those along. 12% for radio and 54% for digital. Yeah, is the kind of the projections for spend in 2018. We then look at the minutes. Now, first to admit, minutes is not the be-all and end-all in terms of how you measure, engagement with particular media. It's a measure, the minutes you spend. There are lots of other measures. We all know that certain media are better at engaging. Some ads we tend to swipe through. Some ads we might kind of go out and make a cup of tea for. Whatever. We know there's lots of different measures, but it's a pretty interesting one. How much time we spend with a particular media? Yeah. So, what we have is all adults, 42% of their time is spent with radio versus 19% of their time is spent with digital, which is kind of a flip on where the money's going. Yeah. So the time spent is inversely proportionate to the money spent. Yeah. Even on the media buyer side, they're spending almost as much time listening to the radio, but they plan to spend less than a quarter of their clients' money on radio. Yeah. Now, is there something odd about this picture? I think that's the challenge to the industry, because what we now know is media buyers love radio. They adore radio. They listen to radio. They're more likely to listen to radio on a particular day than the average person. But it's not being reflected in terms of how they plan to spend their money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damian. There's obviously lots of interesting traits that we can see. I'm delighted to hear that the media buyers are still listening to radio, because otherwise I'd be in a bit of bother. We're going to move this along quickly because we are a little bit running behind time. I'm going to introduce Rory Hamilton from Boys and Girls, who's the creative director, and something that Liam brought up earlier on. It's obviously something that we've been trying to deal with for quite some time, is to get more creativity and more good advertising in radio. For too long, as you referenced, it gets pushed down to not really get the investment and the time in the content and the copy that's going out in the advertising. So Rory's going to bring us through some key aspects to how we can improve that and make it better and create really, really engaging advertising copy.
Thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much. As mentioned, my name is Rory Hamilton, and I promise not to make fun of any media buyers for the entirety of this 10 minutes that we have. My job, I guess, is both I am Executive Creative Director of Boys and Girls at Dublin Advertising Agency, but I'm also the President of ICAD, which is the Institute of Creative Advertising and Design, which means that I spend all of my time just trying to get people to produce better ads. That's my job day to day, be it digital ads, be it video ads, be it film, be it TV. But if that's my job, my passion has certainly been trying to get people to produce better radio. And I genuinely am not sure why that is. Maybe it's because the first brief I ever got was radio, or maybe it's the first advertising award I ever won, or maybe it's just because I'm kind of a control freak and radio has always been a writer's paradise, the place that I could do my work and get it done. I think it's actually because if you look at all the stats we've seen, and they're unbelievable, it feels as though radio from a creative perspective should work a little bit harder and should punch a little bit more above its weight. So today, I just wanted to talk about 10 really simple steps to producing better radio advertising. And feeling that there's no excuse for us not to do better work. All we have to do is follow 10 really simple steps so we can produce amazing, award-winning, quality work that works for brands and generates cut-through. And the first step is probably the easiest one, and this is true for all advertising to a certain extent, and this is kind of my advertising mantra, is a good idea costs the same as a bad one. The really nice thing about ideas is that they're free. They come from your head. You don't have to charge yourself to get them. You can have them in the car. You can have them in the bath. You can have an idea on the jacks. You can have an idea anywhere you want. They're free. That doesn't mean I'm going to write you one for free, because what costs a little bit of money is time. And the only money you have to invest is in time. But my point on this is always the time that you invest in figuring out what your brand has to say, figuring out what the key brand benefit is, figuring out who cares, writing a script is time that's so well spent. Because if you don't take that really simple time, the time you take is wasted. The other massive advantage that radio advertising has in this area above everything else is, I don't know about you guys, but in our agency, whenever D&AD comes out or Cannes comes out, or all the big award-winning ads, or the Super Bowl ads, we look at them and the first thing anybody says is, yeah, but they had 3 million quid. Our agency's obsessed with Nothing Beats a Londoner, the Nike campaign, and we look at it and go, yeah, but nobody gave me 2 million quid to make that. But if I look at the D&AD winners, they had exactly the same amount of money that I had. I have the same budget that they had. I've budget for, they've been won with single voiceovers, they've been won with presenter reads, they've been won with 30-second ads. You can do exactly what Nothing Beats a Londoner does with no money, which makes radio the playground for creatives, because really nothing can stop you from doing really good work. The second is a horrible expression that I was taught when I started in advertising, and it's a fact that generates quite a lot of really bad work, is nobody has ever had an impromptu conversation about your product or service anywhere in their home that you can parachute into and listen to as a radio ad. It is the worst type of advertising imaginable. You know those ads where somebody goes, oh, Deirdre, did you see that so-and-so is involved? And they give a little bit too much information. That has never happened in history. And to prove it's never happened, for today's session, I wrote a really bad radio ad that demonstrates exactly this. So it's kitchen atmos, because it's frequently in a kitchen or a cafe you hear this, and two people having really unlikely conversation about what's going to happen. And this one starts, Margaret says, have you heard about the Radio Days Ireland conference? And Michael says, is that the one in the Gibson Hotel? Right you are, Michael. It's a unique 2-day conference on Thursday the 22nd of February 2018 and February the 23rd. They always give a little bit too much information. Celebrating the power of Irish radio. Ian Dempsey will be there, and Roisin Ingle, and Rory Hamilton. Who's he? Dunno, some kind of support act. And then there's an awkward silence. Obviously short on numbers. Anyway, I love Roisin Ingle. Where do I find out more? Go to www.radiodaysIreland.margaretchipsin.ie. Smarter than you look, Myrat. I have a face for radio. There's insincere laughter. People crash their cars around the country. If I could only give you one point, it would be never do this. Because this costs the same amount as an amazing radio ad. It's terrible. It took me 4 minutes to write yesterday. I'm really sorry somebody put it on branded notepaper, because it would never find its way out of the agency. The second lesson is a little bit more, or kind of rule is a little bit more positive, which is if it looks funny, it's probably going to sound funny. So the first radio ad we ever did as an agency some 8 years ago was a brief we got for John West Tuna with omega-3. And the simple thing that planning gave us was omega-3 makes kids smarter. So we came up with the really simple idea that kids are really stupid. And we found this picture on the internet, which is one of my favorite of all time. I've no idea how he got his head stuck at the back of a chair. I really love his facial expression that he doesn't seem to care that much. And we thought from a radio perspective, is there any way that we could make this sound funny? So we produced our first radio ad as an agency, which was this.
Now, Kevin, the doctor will see you.
Little Kevin Maguire, here we are again. Yes, I can see that. And how did it happen this time? Really? I see. Well, sit up there and relax. And we'll have your head out of that French horn, sorry, tuba, in no time.
Sometimes their brains need a little extra help. That's why John West contains omega-3, which is proven to aid brain development. Visit brainfood.ie.
So it's not rocket science, but it's just a case of trying to figure out, is there something that would sound funny? And a kid with his head stuck in a tuba, certainly, or French horn, certainly sounded funny to us when we started to write it. The other lesson, I guess, and the fourth rule we talk about is 30 seconds might not be enough. I know I'm short for time here, and I know that 30-second ads are great, and I know that all the media people in the room will certainly talk about reach and frequency, and reach and frequency are really important things, but they aren't the only things, because the one thing that radio is best at, I think, is cut through. It's best at getting under your skin, but it's only best at getting under your skin if you give it time. So a really quick example that I have, which is a long ad that I'm going to skip through, is the campaign that we actually did for Choose Radio, where we realized that the 100th anniversary of the original, the very first Irish radio broadcast took place on Sackville Street. So Ireland's first radio broadcast was a Declaration of Independence, which is a really important thing to try and do. So 100 years later, we recreated exactly the same message that went out and took over every single radio station to demonstrate the power of radio.
This is the sound of Ireland's first radio broadcast. This is the sound of Ireland's first radio broadcast, transmitted at this exact time, on this exact date, 100 years ago today. The declaration of an Irish Republic, broadcast in Dublin, heard around the world. This is the sound of Irish radio.
So if two ads can demonstrate the power of radio, it can be funny on one hand and really immediate, and it can be really powerful and dramatic on the other, which demonstrates that radio can sell absolutely anything. But the one rule I'd say is that radio is brilliant at selling things one at a time. It's a medium that can be quick, it's a medium that can be funny, it's a medium that can be dramatic. I always look at it as being like a motorbike rather than like a truck. You can't throw a load of things in there, because once you start to layer messages on it, it becomes ridiculous and unwieldy. And what we're guilty of is adding too many geese or ducks to whatever that problem is at any given time. And what you need to think about is one message, really powerfully delivered, really clearly executed, and really brilliantly effective for clients. The other point I'd add to that is that we should always let Google do the heavy lifting. So radio is great at a load of things. What you don't need to add is what your website is. What you don't need to add is what your phone number is. What you don't need to add is where your office is. What you don't need to add is where your opening hours are, because human beings will Google these things. We don't sit beside, we might use Alexa, we don't sit beside the radio with a pen to write down. So any seconds you are dedicated to www.boysandgirls.ie are wasted and could be given to far better things. Google's there for a reason. We should use it and let it do its job. The other point, though, is if you are asked to add too much stuff into an ad, which we often are, if somebody says you want to throw in the kitchen sink, don't forget the taps. Go all in. The other thing I'd say, which is kind of a hygiene factor, but everybody forgets to do, is to write your script, read it out loud, edit it, rewrite it. What looks good on a page doesn't sound necessarily brilliant in a radio studio. So it's unbelievably important for people to try and do that due diligence with anything that they do. The amount of time and money we waste in studio with creatives who just haven't read the stuff out loud is desperate. It's wasting everybody's time. The ninth point, I guess, is that casting is absolutely everything. This country is full of amazing actors, amazing DJs, amazing radio personalities, amazing sports personalities, amazing people with great voices and great stories. And it's frustrating that everybody hears exactly the same voices on the radio when they turn it on. The same 5 or 6 voiceovers being asked to do whatever the ad is, be it an emotive job or a really interesting and funny one. So casting is absolutely everything. And the example that I'd use, and I hope that it plays, is the really famous McDonald's ad that Jack Charlton read, where he was just brought into studio to try and read the ingredients from some men's products.
Intensive facial cleansing cream. Gentle exfoliating mousse for a man's skin. Pore cleaning facial treatments. Pre-shave peppermint oil. A sprays massage soothing cucumber cream. Pore homé. Revitalized facial spray. Anti-wrinkle gel. Vitamin-enriched gentle cleansing lotion for sensitive skin, formulated by dermatologists to meet a man's specific needs. What? Come on, fellas, get a grip and get yourselves down to McDonald's for a 99p omelette McMuffin with bacon and cheese, specially formulated for men at participating restaurants, but only for a limited time.
It's not necessarily timely, but it's a brilliant reminder of just what a great character voice can do. And if you cast something brilliantly, as this is, it does all of the lifting. The great thing about working with Jack Charlton is he only gives you one take, so that's all you can do. And so whatever you get, and these people luckily got gold. The last step that we have, or rule we have for great radio advertising, is to use it to its advantage. If radio is the theatre of the mind, the nice thing is there are loads of areas that are blind. There's loads of things that you can't see when you play a radio ad. So as something plays out, it's one of the few mediums that you can do a really interesting tease and reveal. And the next ad is a really interesting example of that. It's for Prostate Cancer UK, and it's really worth listening to in terms of particularly to the end as to how they've used the medium to best effect.
Come in.
Right.
Ah, Mr. Pilkington, and how are we today?
Yeah, I'm all right, Doctor. Yeah, I've just come for my checkup.
Okay, then pop your pants off.
What?
Just pop your pants off.
Well,
And,
I've got to take my pants off.
Well, because I have to pop my finger up your to check your prostate gland.
Don't worry about it.
Well, I am worried about it because prostate cancer kills 10,000 men every year in Britain.
You can check that out if I get any symptoms.
Well, there aren't always symptoms, and symptoms do vary from man to man. So the best way to check it out is I just pop my finger up there
I'm really
and have a
happy with
feel.
this. Just
don't worry about it.
Is that it?
Yeah.
It's not that bad.
No.
I don't know why he was worried. You probably saved his life there. Does he have to be here?
He's just a mate. Don't worry about him. He's just watching me at work.
For more information, visit the Prostate Cancer Charity website. Real men know all about it.
So again, that's a really famous example in the UK because the ad was banned until they removed the noise. It's a really funny... I really shouldn't have done a hand gesture for the noise. But again, like the previous example, they were voted as one of the most effective ads by the IPA. And I think if you look at all of those examples, they tend to follow these rules. They use radio to its best effect because it is, for my money, the most powerful medium pound for pound. It's the one that gets under people's skin. It's the one that changes people's minds. It's the one that makes brands and genuinely sells product, but only if we use it in a really creative way. So that's our 10 steps to better radio advertising. Thank you very much.